Part 12. By 1787, religious monopolies were unsustainable. All of the original colonists and founders, to at least some degree, were steeped in a Christian worldview, which held that state-enforced alliances between church and state were necessary for maintaining spirituality, morality, social harmony, and political stability. Thus, 8 of the 13 colonies formally established official state-enforced and state-coerced churches with financial support and monopoly religious advantages. But there was no uniformity. North Carolina was different from New York. All 8 had some level of public financial support. Virginia and Carolina awarded taxes and land for the Anglican Church and gave Anglican ministers sole authority to solemnize marriages. New England colonies made membership a prerequisite for the vote and to hold office. But it was also structural. Colonial state-enforced religion was in a fundamentally different position than it held in the Old World. While official religion in the New World had huge nominal advantages, it never had the deep institutional reach and heft that it had in England. But the trend was always one way, away from state-enforced religious belief and behavior. It was never towards more religion. By 1787, the need and desire for official state religions was very weak. For example, in the 1785 argument over state religion in Virginia, in an essay that laid out widely held beliefs about state-supported Christianity, James Madison wrote that state-sanctioned religion's results were more or less pride and indolence in the clergy, ignorance and servility in the laity, and in both churches and the people, superstition, bigotry, and persecution. We can see an example in the evolution of marriage solemnizations in North Carolina. It is a small thread in the overall tapestry, but illustrates the dynamic. The Carolina Royal Charter of 1663 permitted religious toleration, not support, for all Protestant churches, and it also established the Church of England as the official state religion. But the Church in the New World tended to be the ugly stepchild, managed from England, poorly resourced, a backwater at best. There was no colony official financial support for 40 years. Finally, in 1701, the Vestry Acts established parishes, awarded land for churches, and gave the church authority to levy taxes for support of the clergy. But the English home church provided no clergymen and built few churches. Tax enforcement was spotty and always severely disliked and hard to collect. While there were rough chapels, the first actual churches in Bath and Edenton weren't started until 1732 or 1734. Edenton, due to finances, wasn't even finished until 1760. And there were constant complaints about both clergy and members. The clergy had a reputation for bad behavior. For example, the Reverend John Boyd, one of the first Anglican ministers, had a reputation for drunkenness. But the congregants had issues as well. In the mid-1700s, Charles Woodmason, an Anglican itinerant preacher, spent years traveling an estimated 6,000 miles to North Carolina, trying to stop the threat of non-sanctioned sex. He noted and complained that the evangelical sects, so-called New Lights, had infested North Carolina. His meetings were notoriously non-pious. His members' constant movement during sermons and their outside conversations distracted him. His congregants routinely went outside to talk and returned while Woodsman was exhorting his flock. And he was shocked that the ignorant and illiterate frontiersmen even allowed women to preach. That may sound familiar. That dynamic is still there today. Then, as now, Americans were constantly moving. By 1701, North Carolina already had substantial members of Quakers, Moravians, Scottish and Irish Presbyterians, Huguenots, and Baptists, among others. Some came from England. A lot migrated south from Pennsylvania and other northern colonies. But they came with their own churches and did not need or convert to Anglicanism. They had no need for an official church to make them moral, spiritual, or good citizens. And they hated paying taxes to support a church they did not believe in. We can see this dynamic, this erosion, in the evolution of marriage laws. It's a small part of the overall change, but it illustrates the process. When it started in 1663 and 1665, the colonial charters authorized the Church of England, Anglicans, and nobody else to solemnize marriages. But non-Anglican colonists kept showing up, and there were very few Anglican ministers. So in 1670, the assembly passed a law that allowed a governor or counselor to perform marriages if there was no minister in the parish. That did not make the Anglican establishment happy. Different sects kept discovering, quote unquote, there were no Anglican ministers to be had, and then they got married. Finally, in 1715, the Lord Proprietors restated that only Anglicans could perform marriages, except that magistrates could marry people in parishes where there was no minister. That loophole was still there, and people kept driving marriages through it. Compliance with the state religious law and the ideal of a state church steadily weakened. Between 1717 and 1776, efforts to change the law failed, but an informal agreement, wink wink, nudge nudge, evolved where non-Anglican ministers could solemnize marriages as long as they paid the Anglican fees and the Anglican Church recorded the marriage. The Church of England wasn't happy, but there were too many non-Anglicans, Moravians, Scottish Presbyterians, etc., who moved in, brought money, paid taxes, and voted. The law gradually became a dead letter. The result of all this was a widely held sense that an official state religion was both useless and intrusive. That culminated with a revolution in 1776, which resulted in the new Carolina State Constitution, disestablishing the Anglican Church and guaranteeing freedom and wiping out the Anglican marriage monopoly, among others. It provided in Section 19 that all men have a natural and unalienable right to worship Almighty God, and Section 34, which stated, there shall be no establishment of any one religious church or denomination in this state. The process that played out in North Carolina was true throughout the colonies. By the 1787 convention, many of the state's religions had been so eroded they were either formally disestablished or had been disempowered to the point they had little actual authority, and it was clear the colonists were not going to go back. There was simply no interest or support in creating a new federal layer of official religion of any kind.